What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Alex here to another vinyl tag. This will be my third one, and we're going to tiptoe a little bit into jazz today. So, cheers. So, I said on my last tag, it was the Beatles one, that I was very intimidated there because although I love the Beatles, there's a lot of people who love the Beatles a lot more than I do and know a lot more about them than I do. And so I was a little bit intimidated there, but that doesn't come close to how intimidated I feel going into this one. And I say that with no type of judgment on people who love jazz. I mean, I look up to those people. Like, I would love to become one of those people who are so knowledgeable and have so many experiences about jazz and have such a great jazz collection. I do not. I would probably consider myself a novice. I would be like an unofficial member of the Jazz Bums, which is one of the best like YouTube channels there. I think it's something that I tiptoed into a couple years ago, and I'm continuously trying to learn more and more and getting a lot of enjoyment out of it. It's been a really rewarding experience. So this tag was put together by Rob over at The Waxed. I think 11 questions here. It should be a little bit of a shorter one, or 10 questions. And yeah, we'll dive in. And before we go completely into it, like I was saying before, when I really started getting back into collecting and really back into music several years ago, jazz was not on my radar at all. And it sort of became, just in full transparency, one of those things where I thought to myself, there's a lot of people who really love this. Like, what are you missing? Are you just making the choice not to get into this? Like, do you feel like you should get into it? Like, I was having a lot of those questions and asking myself, like, am I getting into it just because I feel like I should? Like, you know, all that kind of stuff. And so this sort of segues into the first question, which was really, you know, kind of about how I got into this and why I'm into it and all that kind of stuff. So the first question is show a jazz album that received as VCLT. VCLT is Vinyl Community Love Train. It's essentially people who send, you know, records or CDs or whatever to other people in the community. It's just a really cool thing that we send stuff off and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know if I ever received like a jazz record in form of a formal VCLT, but when I first started getting back into collecting, I was talking to my friend's dad, the owner of the Vinyl Garage, the guy with like the tens of thousands of records hanging out in his garage. And I knew he was not a jazz guy, but I knew he had jazz records. And I said, Dave, I'm considering getting into this. If you could grab me a few records from the garage, I'll pay for them or whatever. But, you know, pick something. I don't know what I'm getting into. Just pick something. And he came down and he gave me a few records. But one of the records he gave me was, of course, arguably the greatest jazz record of all time, John Coltrane's Love Supreme. Now, before tweak out, this is I think an early 70s reissue on the ABC kind of aspect of Impulse. So not an original or anything like that. And the irony here, in the people who are really into jazz, and if you're someone like me who's more of a jazz novice, then, you know, maybe, you know, you could learn something from this too. But here's the thing. This is arguably the greatest jazz record of all time, right? It's at the top of all the lists. You see it all the time. It's like his magnum opus. This is not a very, I'll just say it, this is not an accessible record. I mean, this, for someone who's never listened to jazz before, would be a great record to really make someone never want to listen to jazz. Over the years, I've grown to have a great respect and appreciation for it, of course, and I understand it. But I've always said, like, you know, for someone getting into jazz, you say, okay, well, who are the most popular jazz artists? Okay, well, John Coltrane is one of the most popular ones. Well, what's his best record? Well, Love Supreme. Okay, I'll start there. I would be hesitant. I wouldn't do that. I wonder if that's done more harm than good over the years. But I say that not because it's a bad record. It's just, it's a tough record to get into if you're a novice or just exploring the genre or whatever it is. So funny enough, he got me this and I listened to it and I was like, I don't know if I could do this. Of course, now, years later and a lot more listening later, I learned to be able to do this, and I do love this record, but it's just funny that was the first, probably it's the first jazz record I ever got, and it almost ruined it for me, but now it's much better. So I'll call that VCLT because it was something that he sort of gifted to me and picked out for me, even though it wasn't like an official mail train in the vinyl community, but I'll always be grateful for this record. And I'll never get rid of this one just because it was sort of the first one I ever got. So, yeah, first question. Question number 2, show a jazz album where you have both in stereo and mono. So Much like a lot of people, my favorite artist, someone I try to collect everything from, of course, is Miles Davis. And, you know, the catalog is so vast and there are so many different reissues. But for the one that I pulled, I'm going to go with 1959's interpretation, I guess, of Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, conducted by Gil Evans. And so this is an original mono. Jazz people love the labels on the Columbia 6i. And then it was also obviously put out by Mobile Fidelity on a double 45 RPM, but this is in stereo. So mono and stereo. Now these types of things, I mean, even some Miles Davis stuff is kind of hard to get into if you're not used to it. You kind of got to know where to go in. The stuff that he did with Gil Evans, that's more orchestral, really accessible stuff. Obviously, maybe some of like the hard bop or post bop fans might not be as big of a fan, but you know, for me, I think totally accessible. Porgy and Bess, Sketches of Spain, all that kind of stuff, I think is really accessible and really easy to get into. So yeah, those are my 2 picks for that one. Question number 3. Show a jazz album that you have an OG and a reissue of. I always wonder, this is a total kind of aside here, when we say OG, do people know that stands for Original Gangster? Not like original as in like a short for original, but OG is Original Gangster. I think it's great. I use it all the time, but I just think it's funny because there's a lot of people I feel like that might not know that. Fun fact. So, show an album that you have an OG of and a reissue of. Well, I will cheat a little bit here, and I'm so sorry. Another one of the first jazz records I ever got, of course, what a lot of people get, is Take 5, Dave Brubeck. This is, I guess, what would be like considered maybe a second or third pressing, and so it's not like a first, but it is on that 6i Columbia there as well. And then I also have a copy. When these were reissued, they started using different kind of colors and different cover sort of variants. And so this one was a reissue that came out in the early 70s. You can kind of tell by the difference in covers and colors and all that kind of stuff. So we'll call this an OG because I guess it was part of like, you know, the first couple runs or whatever, and go from there. Show a jazz album by an artist not known for being a jazz performer. So this one was one of the first ones that came to mind. Of course, I think also we lost him last year. This person later was known for someone who could dabble in all the genres, but at the time, I think this threw a lot of people off, and a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, who is that? He was coming from a hard rock, blues rock sort of background, and then he put out 2 basically fusion records in the mid-70s. I'm going to go with the second one, and that's Wired from Jeff Beck, 1976. Now, this is a instrumental, jazz fusion, funky, amazing record. But the thing that stands out for me from a jazz standpoint is not only the lineup here, which is Jan Hammer on here, Narada Michael Walden on here, obviously, you know, Jeff Beck and Max Middleton on here doing all types of stuff. But I think like 80% of the compositions were from Narada Michael Walden. They do a Mingus tune on here, a Mingus interpretation. So although it probably doesn't fall into like the formal jazz that a lot of people will be talking about for the jazz stuff, this to me is a total jazz fusion masterpiece, and something I think should be added to any kind of collection for those people getting into it. So yeah, Wired, Jeff Beck, love this. Blow by Blow is the one that came out right before it. An incredible record as well, although I feel this one might be a little bit more jazzier, just based again on that lineup and the compositions. All right. 5. Show an album that was initially shelved and issued on vinyl many years after its recording. So this is kind of a, again, maybe for some of the people getting into jazz who don't know, it is not uncommon for a lot of sessions to happen and a lot of recordings to happen during a year or whatever in the 50s or 60s or whatever, and then it just sort of gets shelved and released years and years later. There's a lot of different examples of that happening. I know with like the Blue Note Classic and Tone Poet series that come out, that's where a lot of those reissues come from. The one I picked is one that an artist I've been gravitating more towards over the last several years, and that's Andrew Hill. This is Dance with Death here. These were recordings from 1968, I believe, and then was later issued the first time in 1980. And then this was part of the Tone Poet series last year, or maybe it was the year before. But yeah, I mean, Andrew Hill, to me, a very cool mix pianist of just very creative, sometimes a little bit outside of like the circle of what you think is quote unquote super accessible, but still hangs in there tight. It's a good mixture there where it's not completely out there, but it's also not completely, you know, straight either. So yeah, I found myself loving this record and a lot of the stuff that Andrew Hill's put out. So yeah, I went with this one. It was issued for the first time in 1980, although this was a recording back from 1968. And this is the Blue Note Tone Poet reissue from a couple of years ago. So Andrew Hill, Dance with Death, beautiful record. Let's see. Number 6, show a jazz album that was issued as a private pressing. This is funny, and I think this has some sort of sentimental value to me. Honestly, it's the only reason I own it. I don't know how much more private you can get than like university pressing. I went with the Big Band Sounds of the BGSU Jazz Lab Band. BGSU is Bowling Green State University. That is a public university in the state of Ohio. It's also where I went to college. It's my alma mater. It's a place that's very special to me. And I saw this in a record store for a couple bucks and I said, why not? Why not? Why would you not want to have, you know, a record like this from the jazz band of doing big band tunes or whatever from your alma mater? So yeah, they do some Duke Ellington here, some Count Basie here, some other stuff. Yeah, you know, it's kind of gimmicky for what it is, but also I just think it's a cool sentimental tie back to marrying sort of my current love of music and jazz with, you know, my my alma mater and a place that will always mean a lot for me. So yeah, the Bowling Green State University Jazz Lab Band, Big Band Sounds. All right, number 7. Show a jazz album that is an excellent introduction to free jazz, avant-garde, or spiritual jazz. This is a great question because, you know, free jazz, avant-garde, spiritual jazz are typically 3 aspects of jazz that are pretty inaccessible in terms of listening. They turn a lot of people off. It's very dissonant. But for me, and there was a couple different options and a couple different options from this artist, but I went with this one for a couple of different reasons I'll talk about. I'm going with Illuminations from Alice Coltrane and Carlos Santana. Kind of a partner record that they did, I believe, in 71-ish or so, somewhere around there. Maybe 73 in that range. So yeah, this is a little bit kind of free, spiritual, but it's not so far out there that it hurts your brain or anything like that. It's also a really accessible record to purchase. I mean, I think this is like a $10 record most of the time. You can find it in most places. And I think for people who are maybe coming from like a rock side of like, well, maybe I want to get into this, it does have Carlos Santana on there. So if you're a Santana fan, that does dabble into obviously some Latin jazz and some other fusion bits as well. So I think this is a great record in terms of introing somebody into spiritual jazz or free jazz a little bit. That's not so out there that's going to turn you off, but also gives you a good taste of the genre. And if you like this, you'll be able to sort of take that next step into other stuff, especially from Alice Coltrane or others. Number 8, show an album that is considered an example of cheap heat. Well, the genre that got me into jazz, before getting into jazz, was jazz fusion. And so I fell in love with a lot of those jazz fusion bands. This is a guy who sort of became a staple into jazz fusion. And this is something that you can find in most dollar bins. And I think for like $1 or $2 or $3 or whatever that you spend on it, it might be the best bang for buck for just fiery, awesome jazz fusion. I'm talking about Enigmatic Ocean from Jean-Luc Ponty. Of course, the French violin player had a lot of experience prior to this in Frank Zappa's band, as well as the Mahavishnu Orchestra. This is a solo record, though. And what kills it here is the lineup. So you have, obviously, Jean-Luc Ponty on violin. Alan Holdsworth is just ripping it. And if you know Alan Holdsworth, you know he's one of the best jazz guitarists, best prog guitarist, one of the best guitarists ever of all time. But Daryl Sturmer is also there, no slouch himself. And obviously on drums, the great Steve Smith. Yes, that's Steve Smith, of course, of Journey fame. Yes, the drummer in Journey during much of their fame really has a jazz background. So yeah, Steve Smith is on this record. But this is proggy, but not proggy like Yes or Genesis proggy. We're talking proggy of long compositions, some insane blistering playing, both by Jean-Luc Ponty as well as everybody else on this record. It's an absolute fire record. And again, $2-3, something like that. If you see this out there, buy this. It's incredible. And then the last question, or I'm sorry, number 9, show an album that you're looking forward to being reissued in 2024. for this question, I just looked up the 2024 Blue Note Tone Poet sort of schedule and looked at what I'm excited for. And the artist the record that I'm going to pick is Jackie McLean's Action, or Action, Action, Action. That was originally released in 1967. Love Jackie McLean, killer lineup with Charles Tolliver, Billy Higgins, Bobby Hutcherson, who's always amazing, and Cecil McBee. So I'm looking forward to that. I think it comes out in March, and really looking forward to that one. And the last question is a jazz album, which you consider a grail that you picked up, in 2023. Not necessarily consider this a grail, but sort of within the style of it is, yeah, I buy a ton of reissues. It's a great time to get into jazz reissues, but I've always wanted an original, Blue Note record from the 50s, right? That wasn't like Jimmy Smith, and that's no disrespect to Jimmy Smith. It's just that those are really pretty accessible and easy to find. But when I was able to find this, I was just so excited. I'm still so excited. So this is an original mono of Night in Tunisia from Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. So still something I'm just overwhelmingly excited about, and just really glad I have it. So although it wasn't this album specifically that was a grail, it was always something that was important for me to secure an original, Blue Note from the 50s. And the Squeaks, I think, in 59 maybe, or 61. Regardless, it's something I'm really happy with and proud of, and it's just cool to have. So yeah, that's it. So there are the questions. Again, big thanks to Rob over at The Waxed for putting this together, and thank you all of you for hanging out with me. Even if you don't like jazz and you're just watching because you're a supportive friend or family member, just know sincerest thanks for all the support and everything you do in supporting this silly hobby and thing that we do and talking in front of this and all that kind of stuff. So thanks again. Let me know if you have any questions or if you want recommendations. If you're also a novice or just kind of getting into this, I think I could have a good little approach to helping some folks out. So thanks again. Be good and have a good rest of the day. Cheers, y'all. Bye.